Today I'll be reviewing a story about a librarian. No, that's not quite right. It's the story of a woman who's achieved her lifelong dream of becoming a librarian, had reached true fulfillment, living a life surrounded by books, and then had all that cruelly snatched away from her when an earthquake resulted in her being buried and crushed under the books she so loved. Then she is reborn as the daughter of a soldier and seamstress in a medieval fantasy, and must struggle to regain access to her beloved books in a world before the printing press, one without widespread literacy. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present Ascendance of a Bookworm. So, in some isekais, whatever god transported our protagonist to the new world decides to give them some sort of bonus skill or power-up. Whoever sent our protagonist Mine over, though, seems to have had a bit of a mean streak, as though yes, she has plenty of mana, her special ability seems to be getting sick. A lot. Mine gets too excited? Well, she'll be in bed for a day. Mine walks 100 meters? Oh no! She'll have a fever for a week! So yeah, instead of being elevated above the likes of the local populace, Mine starts off as a burden to her family. Against this backdrop, she then engages in her quest for books, which she discovers in this world are far too expensive to buy. A large component of this story early on then is Mine bringing her knowledge from her past life to bear to try and make books from scratch, along with developing a number of other products like shampoo, hairpins, and pancakes. In that sense, it has a lot in common with Dr. Stone's premise, and as it goes on, it also begins to take pages from Spice and Wolf's book, with Mine beginning to engage in medieval trade and commerce. The start of the story is a bit slow-paced and slice-of-lifey, but without getting into too many spoilers, believe me, it gets more exciting as it goes on. Easily my favorite part of the series is watching Mine grow as a character. In an odd sort of way, Bookworm is a coming-of-age story for her. Back when she was in Japan, because life was relatively easy and safe, Mine was able to get away with a certain amount of laziness and irresponsibility, and she didn't spend much effort on interacting with other people. Now that she has a frail body and is in a much tougher medieval world, she suddenly has to grow up in a way that she didn't have to before. She starts to actively take on responsibility, develop working relationships, and hell, even appears to get better at dealing with members of the opposite sex. I feel like a lot of isekai's protagonists' personalities don't really change that much between the old world and the new. But with Mine, in Bookworm, we do see her start to become a new person. Growing up aside, her relationship with her family is another great example of her growth. At the beginning of the story, she doesn't really seem to have any attachment to them, and views them in a sort of detached manner. But go a couple of volumes in, and she starts viewing them as being as important as books, which is saying something for her. Also, through certain actions, she makes it abundantly clear that if you threaten her family, she will be a force to be reckoned with. So yeah, in summary, Mine develops a lot, and I like that. Other than that, I also really appreciate the story's take on redeveloping modern tech in a pre-modern world. Yes, Mine does take full advantage of her knowledge of the past world to develop things like plant-based paper and pizza, but her powers of creation are limited by her memory and the tools available. These limits make what she does feel a lot more believable than what goes on in most other entries in this genre. And since it stretched my credulity less, I enjoyed it a heck of a lot more. I also appreciated the fact that this story goes into reasonable detail of Mine's patenting and selling of her inventions, looking at the economic impact they might have, dealing with vested interests they might upset, and that type of thing. Honestly, although this isn't the story, I would have happily read many volumes of the tales of Mine the Merchant. Finally, Bookworm is just so gosh darn wholesome. Mine, while driven, is a fundamentally kind and generous person. The adults who act as mentor figures for her genuinely seem to have her best interests at heart and all dote on her in their own ways. And her relationship with her childhood friend Lutz is the cutest thing. Reading this book after work sent all my troubles flying away, and parts of it were easily sweet enough to give you diabetes. The biggest complaint I can see leveled at this series is that it has a fairly slow start. Mine, Being frequently sick and knowing little of the world does mean that it takes quite a while for anything to get accomplished at the beginning of the story. Even when she does start to get the ball rolling, the story often feels much more like a slice of life than a fantasy adventure. Hell, it takes a little while for it even to be clear that the new world Mine is in even has fantasy elements. Its pace does pick up later, honest, but judging from some of the comments I've seen online, a lot of people just don't have the patience to get to that point. Another gripe I have comes from the way the book handles a certain plot point. You see, Mine isn't reborn as a baby. She sort of comes to occupy the body of a young sick girl, who presumably dies just after or as Mine enters her body. Mine then wants to make sure no one knows that she's not the original because, medieval times, burn the witch and all that is pretty popular. Anyways, somehow, despite her change in personality and her inventions, she doesn't raise any suspicions from her parents or little sister, who have literally known the previous Mine all her life. Meanwhile, some of the people who are far less acquainted with her kind of figure out something's up. It's not a huge thing, but the fact that Mine's parents somehow don't notice her jump in intelligence and change in attitude, or at least make something of it, seems a bit unrealistic. Bookworm is an easy recommendation for me to give. I love the characters, I love the story, and generally reading it just made me so happy. What more can I say? Go and read it. It's available to read or buy on J Novel Club and also sold on Bookwalker. If you're all caught up on Bookworm's translation and are looking for something else to read, I would recommend Release That Witch, a Chinese isekai web novel about an engineer transported to a medieval world, which does the same sort of reinventing modern tech that Mine does, albeit as a prince with the help of witches, so he has a slightly easier time of it. Anyways, that concludes my review. Thanks for listening. Cheers!